Okay, we are ready to get started.
All right, thank you, Emily. Make sure I get in the right place. All right, well, thank you very much, Emily, and welcome to those of you who have joined us on Zoom and to our audience on Facebook today for this critical webinar addressing a subject that, according to the latest polls, is top of mind for voters, both Republicans and Democrats, and that is democracy and the rule of law. I'm Elizabeth Myers. I'm the chair of the Democrats Abroad Africa Committee. I live in Marrakesh, Morocco, and I vote in Virginia. I've already registered to receive my ballot for 2022, and I encourage you all not to lose any time and do the same. Our democracy is counting on you. Today's event is sponsored by the DA Africa Committee and the DA Global Black Caucus to highlight the importance of accountability and the rule of law and the preservation of our democracy, and to show that our votes from abroad do count. Before we kick off, let me just take care of some housekeeping, and that is we are recording and live streaming this session. Normally we would say if you don't want to be filmed, turn your camera off, but we are not seeing your images. If you would like to ask a question at any time during the session, please add it to the chat box. And we also have closed captioning running as well. And if you need that, and if you don't want that, you can turn it off. So with 67 days to go before the critical midterm federal, state, and local elections, we absolutely must win, and we need your help. Democrats Abroad is a volunteer-driven organization, so please help us register Americans all over the world to vote. And you can also make a financial contribution, especially we are especially in need of sustaining donors who can give monthly at whatever level, even $5, the price of a cup of coffee. And you can become a volunteer, and we will put the link to the volunteer form for Democrats Abroad Africa Committee in the chat box. So I want to hand over to my co-host now, Lee Donald Jasmore, who is the chair of Democrats Abroad's Global Black Caucus and also the new international secretary. So Jazz, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and thank you, Democrats Abroad Africa, for organizing such a great and very important event. So the Global Black Caucus is going to take a slight different angle to such an important topic and look at it from a more progressive kind of view, let's say it like that. The January 6th committee hearings painted an elaborate, damning, and true portrait of former President Donald Trump's role in this insurrection. But race is also playing a critical and central role. If sometimes unspoken, let's try to connect the dots here. January 6th was a racial backlash. Some white people are really concerned about a loss of power and status in American society. It's not about the power that's maintained by burning crosses. It's about the power that's maintained by telling some stories and not others in schools. It's about the power to elect people who you think will do our bidding or your bidding. The hearings haven't mentioned race much, yet it is a central part of their case that rioters showed up precisely because they believed Trump's lie about a stolen election. But who believed that lie and why they believed it has everything to do with race. The elephant in the room is that most are white and male, but more than half are white-collar doctors and lawyers. And they come from cities and suburbs, many from places Biden won. Research has shown that a driving force among insurrectionists and those that support them is fear of a white majority becoming a minority and having to give up power. To put it simply, they came from places that used to be almost all white and aren't anymore. The racist conspiracy theory that Black and brown people are replacing white people as part of the nefarious democratic plan to take power and steal elections, a theory peddled by people like Tucker Carlson. And it's believed not just by many of the people who stormed the Capitol, but by the vast majority of Republicans. What's dangerous about this is when a group like this begins to adopt the mindset or the rhetoric of an oppressed minority. Dangerous because when members of a group that still holds the very real privilege, like white people, imagine themselves on the margins, that when violent white nationalism takes hold. The narrative that January 6th committee has presented for the most part of this has been told in voices of Republicans and former Trump loyalists. There was one notable exception, Ruby Freeman and her daughter, Shay Moss. Moss and her mom are both poll workers who Trump attacked by name, leading to death threats and racist attacks. Political scientist Hakeem Jefferson said that these two women represent is not a political party or person in power, but the right of average people to vote, a right that for many was only achieved within recent memory. So many Black, Indigenous people of colors in particular work on these front lines of democracy. It's always been told by my grandmother how important it is to vote and how people before me, a lot of people, older people in my family, did not have that right. Our fragile and incomplete multiracial democracy is in peril. It's not just January 6th, it's also a slow-moving threat from the right. The Supreme Court, gerrymandering and voter suppression laws like some of the ones now on the books in Georgia, overseen by Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. He was lauded at the hearings for standing up for democracy and against Trump. But back home, the laws he championed have made it harder for people of color to vote. January 6th was a racial project, but the everyday undoings and attacks on American democracy are also a part of a racial project. So yeah, it's the elephant in the room, but it's a whole big, big room. This is all about race, all the time. Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and handing right back over to you.
Thank you so much, Jazz. Well, I have the great pleasure of teeing up our talk today, although Jazz has already done a pretty good job of doing that, and introducing our guest speaker. We called the program "The Rule of Law Came of Age in Africa, Will It Die in America?" And that's a really poignant question for this time in our history. People have been interested in the rule of law for millennia because without some form of it, all you have is chaos and anarchy. You can't do trade, you can't do commerce, and you cannot live peaceably. While US law is derived from the common law of Great Britain, going all the way back to Magna Carta, some elements of the law go way back even further than that. The Hammurabi Code, for example, dating to sometime around 1792 BC in Mesopotamia, which is now modern-day Iraq, had one of the earliest examples of an accused person being considered innocent until proven guilty. And this is an element of the law that we still have today in American law. Much later, around 747 BC in ancient Egypt, which is of course in Africa, they had a legal system based on civil code where judges relied on records establishing precedent, a form of adjudication that we have today in the US known as stare decisis. As Americans, we've taken for granted that we live in a system based on the rule of law. But today it's under threat, as Jazz says, by some who believe the law doesn't apply to them. And according to recent polls, many Americans believe right now in 2022 that taking the law into their own hands and threatening or actually doing violence is the way to resolve political problems. And that has been fomented by politicians, of course. But one thing I, as a lawyer, certainly had not counted on was the role of lawyers in undermining the rule of law. Well, we did actually have a subtitle for this program as well, but the better judgment of my committee prevailed and we didn't really use it. And that was "Kill all the lawyers?" ? Being not only a lawyer, but an English major, the irony of this particularly struck me. This is what Shakespeare's coup plotting character, Dick Butcher, in Henry VI said, when the houses of York and Lancaster began to divide, and he and his co-conspirators were considering their plan to overthrow the king. He said, "The first thing we do is kill the lawyers." Well, some 400 years later, it's the lawyers who are facilitating and making possible an attempted coup on our own American government, a system of democracy founded when we rejected a structure based on monarchy and adopted one based on the periodic, peaceful transfer of power through elections. Well, whether you believe there was an attempted coup on the US government or not, there is no question that lawyers were pivotal to the strategies that Donald Trump and his Republican supporters devised for him to stay in power. And lawyers continue to be pivotal to Trump's efforts right now to stay out of jail for the innumerable crimes that credible evidence shows that he committed. The latest evidence being, it just came to light night before last, when the DOJ made its court filing answering a motion filed by Trump's new Florida lawyers for a special master to review the documents that were seized from Mar-a-Lago, including 300 classified documents. Well, there is an organization that is working hard to hold the lawyers accountable, and I'm pleased to have its director here with us today. Michael Teter is the managing director of the 65 Project, aptly named for the 65 lawsuits that over 100 lawyers helped to file to overturn the legitimate 2020 election results. Michael has a couple of decades of experience in the intersection of law and politics, and he's a graduate of Yale Law School and worked as a union side labor lawyer. And he joined the Kerry campaign as an organizer in the Iowa caucuses and quickly rose to become the campaign's Wisconsin state field director for the general election. Following that, he worked for several years in private practice as an attorney at Perkins Coie before spending a decade in academia and teaching constitutional law, statutory interpretation, administrative law, and election law at Pomona College, the University of Utah and Georgetown Law School. Prior to taking on the role as the managing director of the 65 Project, he was general counsel at a national advocacy organization dedicated to expanding ballot access. And he also served as an assistant attorney general for the state of Utah and ran his own legal consulting and civil rights firm. So Michael, it's great to have you. I understand that the 65 Project is a bipartisan effort. Give us some background, if you would, on what happened in 2020 and 2021 and why you founded this organization.
Great. Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks everyone for attending. Everyone is aware largely of what happened after the 2020 presidential election. There were lawsuits filed across the country in the key battleground states by President Trump's at the time's legal team, as well as allies and supporters like Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and the like. And those efforts were designed not so much to prevail in the court of law, as we see it. They had no legal basis. They had no factual basis. They were there in large part as a political tool. They were there as a form of propaganda, so that at rallies, when they visited state legislatures, when the campaign team spoke to reporters, they could talk about the lawsuits, talk about the fraud claims, and amplify their largely destructive effort to overturn the presidential election. And the concern then is that when you are practicing law like I regularly do, and you lose repeatedly, you decide to not do that again because you realize that you're not going to prevail. But when you have a group of lawyers who have no actual interest and expectation to prevail, there's no deterrent effect that comes from losing because they got out of those lawsuits what they wanted. They could stand before rallies, again, crowds, January 6th crowds. They could stand in landscaping company parking lots and talk about the court cases that they had filed as if they had some validity. And because they got out of them what they want, they'll do it again. It's become part of their political tool. So we've decided that we want to hold them accountable. We want to look backwards to the lawyers who were responsible for that to prevent that from happening again in the future. So our effort at accountability is designed really to create a deterrent effect and to prevent those lawyers and lawyers like them from doing this again. And so there have been a number of instances where the highest profile of the lawyers had bar complaints filed against them. Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell are the best examples of that. But no organization, no group had focused on the lawyers who took Sidney Powell's call, who took Rudy Giuliani's call, and then lent their efforts and their credibility and their law license and integrity to those in-state efforts. And so we are focused on those lawyers across the country who engaged in that.
So, Michael, when you say that these lawyers filed meritless lawsuits with no expectation of prevailing, don't we call that frivolous? Don't we call that malicious? What is that? And how does that fit in with a lawyer's ethical obligation of things like candor to the tribunal and honesty and fairness?
Right. So just to back up, every lawyer who is licensed to practice has agreed to abide by their state's rules of professional conduct. And the rules are generated as models from the American Bar Association, and then states adopt them to suit their needs. And so every lawyer has an obligation, and one of them across the board, as Elizabeth is mentioning, is duty of candor to tribunal and responsibility to not bring meritless, frivolous claims. I think that actually we've in some ways tried to avoid just saying that these are baseless or frivolous, because that feels like lots of people say that about any number of claims. This is a step beyond that. There was no legal basis for the claims that they were bringing, but there was also no factual basis for the claims that they were bringing. And in fact, in many responses, they knew that. They knew that they didn't have the facts. One group of lawyers filed 4 different lawsuits across this country, in Georgia, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and in Arizona. And they said, this is based on suspicion. This is based on speculation. This is based on conjecture. We need the facts to be able to then prove that there was fraud. That's not what you can do in court. You have to have a basis for it. And so by bringing those claims, they violated the rules of professional conduct. And that's what we're going after. Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe say a few words also about, there were 65 of these cases. Were all of these judges non-Trump appointees? Were they Democrat judges? I mean, there's a lot of comment about why these cases lost.
Right.
That has nothing to do with it, right?
That's right. So there were 65 lawsuits approximately. But when we named the project, there were 65. Then there actually were a few more that sprung up afterwards. So 65 lawsuits across the country. Some of them, although meritless in the outcome and ultimately, were not the kinds that are deserving of reprimand. They were maybe efforts to prevent late ballots from being counted, ballots that were absentee that hadn't arrived on time. Those are typical standard ones, but a vast majority were baseless and fraudulent, quite frankly, in their use of the law and facts that they had. And judges across the country rejected them. And from political appointees, from President Trump even had political appointees rejecting his lawsuits. A lot of them Republicans. The Republican-controlled Supreme Court in Wisconsin rejected their efforts. Judges from across the country. Again, in Arizona, one of them just had recently been appointed by President Trump, and she also rejected the efforts. So there was it's a testament to the fact that how frivolous the claims truly were, that they could find no judge really, no court especially, who were willing to accept the legal conclusions and the factual allegations that the plaintiffs were making.
So the 65 project is relatively new. I forget exactly when you were founded. Was it earlier this year or was it last year?
It was this year. We launched in March of this. We started a little bit before that.
Right. So it's only been a few months, but you've already done you've already at least filed some particularly noteworthy, we've done some particularly noteworthy actions in terms of filing cases or trying to move forward the potential disbarment of these lawyers who violated their oath to the Code of Conduct and the US Constitution. Tell us some about some of those things that you've been working on.
Right. So as of yesterday we filed 15 more. So we've now filed 40 bar complaints against lawyers across the country. We started our efforts in March with focus on the false elector scheme. So very few people talk about this, but 3 of the false electors were lawyers. And the false elector scheme, as people generally know now, was actually originated and cultivated and pushed forward by lawyers. So the advisors in the Trump campaign and the Trump world who were advising on the false elector scheme, people like Jenna Ellis and Boris Epstein and Cleta Mitchell, we filed bar complaints against. In addition to the 3 false electors, 2 in Georgia, 1 in Wisconsin, who were false electors and also lawyers. And then also there were a couple insurrectionist lawyers, people who participated not just in the rally, but in then the insurrection itself, which means they went into the Capitol. We filed bar complaints against them. One of them still has a criminal case pending. So that bar complaint will probably wait until the outcome of that criminal proceeding. And then we also filed recently against Ted Cruz. And that is one of the few public officials who, as of now, we filed against. And that's largely because Senator Cruz tried to have it both ways. He, if people remember, went on TV in December saying that he had been asked by Pennsylvania Republicans and President Trump to represent them in the Supreme Court case, if the case had oral argument. And he said he had agreed to take on that responsibility. Well, that created an attorney-client relationship, and the rules are stronger and more restrictive if you are in a representation situation. And so Senator Cruz, trying to use his law degree and his law license to kind of bolster himself among the Trump world, truly violated his rules of responsibility. And so we filed a bar complaint against him. We've also had a wave of complaints that were generated by the January 6th committee, who are doing incredible work revealing the behind the scenes efforts by lawyers to help overturn the 2020 presidential election. So as that committee does work and releases names of individuals who otherwise were not publicly known, we act quickly. We conduct our own research, we verify what was spoken about at the hearing, and then we file bar complaints. So we've taken on that responsibility as kind of a quick action response team. And then in addition, we are methodically going through each state where there was litigation, and we are reviewing all of the pleadings, all of the litigation in those states, and then finding the lawyers who engaged in what we believe to be conduct that was violating their role of responsibility. And so we targeted Pennsylvania first. So we filed 9 bar complaints in Pennsylvania based on litigation in that state. And then yesterday we filed 15 bar complaints against lawyers who are participating in the Wisconsin litigation. And what's interesting about that, I think to point out, is that of the 15 lawyers who we filed bar complaints based on Wisconsin, only 2 were from Wisconsin. This was truly a national effort of lawyers coming into other states where they were not licensed and seeking to overturn that state's fair and free and legitimate presidential election results, which I think is an even more, I don't want to say grotesque is too strong of a word, maybe, but it really demonstrates egregious and quite frankly demonstrates your point, Elizabeth, about the rule of law and the willingness of lawyers to really disregard their responsibilities and seek to overturn democracy and therefore with it the rule of law.
So you didn't mention John Eastman, and he was the person whose memo, as I recall, was the basis of the fake electors scheme that actually was across 7 states and very well coordinated. It was not just a kind of, oh, we'll try it here, no, it was very well coordinated. If you look at all of those fake elector forms, they were all the same. They all came from the same template. And it was, as I recall, John Eastman who wrote that memo attesting to the legality of it when it was clear it was definitely not legal. Is he on your list of people you filed bar complaints against?
We did not file a bar complaint against John Eastman because by the time we launched, there was already an active investigation by the California bar into his efforts. So providing a public filing would not have moved that issue forward. What we did do, though, is one is that as John Eastman became well known as the leader of this effort, and as a California court, when John Eastman was trying to prevent the January 6th committee from gaining access to his records, California federal court said that John Eastman more likely than not engaged in a criminal conspiracy with President Trump and others. We then took that and we filed a request with the United States Supreme Court to disbar John Eastman from that court. There's no explanation for why someone with the undisputed background of John Eastman and the work that he did, he doesn't deny what he did, should be member of our nation's highest court. And also in that request, we asked that Justice Thomas recuse himself, because what's not talked about directly often enough is that Ginny Thomas was playing a key role, and just came out today that Ginny Thomas was not just trying to overturn the results in Arizona, but by calling members of the legislature who also were former clerks of Justice Thomas, her husband, but also in Wisconsin. She was really coordinating the effort as well. And so Justice Thomas shouldn't play a role in deciding John Eastman's fate within that court. And then while John Eastman wrote the first memo that's well known, actually Ken Cheeseborough wrote one of the very first memos back in I think it was October, talking about, in essence, the designs of a false elector scheme. And Ken Cheeseborough is an attorney in New York and Massachusetts who we did file a bar complaint against, and has been revealed by the January 6th committee as playing a key role in all of that.
Wow. Is there any issue with the 65 Project having standing to bring these complaints, or standing to basically engage in the activity that you're doing?
No, fortunately, there's not. So unlike in a lawsuit where we talk about standing, you have to be harmed in order to be able to bring the lawsuit. In this instance, for complaints against lawyers who are violating their rules of responsibility, anybody has standing. It can be anybody in the public, any organization, anybody. And originally we had thought about having lawyers within the community bring the complaint. And in fact, in Texas, we had noteworthy co-signers of our complaint against Ted Cruz, including a former state bar president and a former judge. But as we made our way through the states, and we realized that we didn't want any individual to be subjected to the kind of attacks that we've seen emanate from Trump world. Whenever anybody is questioning him or his actions, we decided that it would be better for us to just file as the institutional filer and organization doing it.
So how have you managed to find resources to do this? This must take a lot of money, and that's going to lead me to my next question. How can people support you? Is there foundational money you've been able to get to do this? Are there organizations committed to democracy, or universities helping fund this, law schools?
No, we don't have any we have a minimal amount of foundational support from organizations that are focused on democracy protection, because they recognize the importance, as you've said, of the rule of law in democracy, and the abuse of the court system to undermine the rule of law means the fall of democracy, quite frankly. And so we've had some institutional support. We've had some donor support from who are interested in that from that angle. We also have support from people online. So the best way to support our efforts is to contribute online. We have a donate button. We send out individual thank yous. I reach out to people who have contributed because I want them to know that this is really an important cause. And I check those contributions every day, because it is how we are going to be able to move forward. And I will say one other plug for our efforts is that in the past, there have been bar complaints filed against some members. For example, in Georgia, the false electors had bar complaints filed against them that the state bar had dismissed. They said that they weren't going to move forward with those bar complaints. And then we stepped in with our bar complaint. We conduct a lot of research. We do a lot of analysis. They are long bar complaints that they are, and they're well analyzed and thorough. And after we stepped in, the Georgia State Bar has moved forward with our bar complaints against the false electors there and have referred them to the State Disciplinary Committee. And those lawyers now have to testify under oath about their conduct to the State Bar. And so it is a lot of effort. We have research assistants who are on staff. We have volunteer attorneys who help us finally kind of move through. But we do need that support from people online.
And that's also what I was going to ask you. If attorneys want to reach out and help, can they do that? Do you have, there are tons of attorneys who believe in this issue so strongly that can't imagine you have any dearth of help. But if people want to help you, can you do that?
Yeah, so there's also a volunteer page on our website, so you can fill out the form, and if you can provide what state you're in or what state you're licensed in, we ask for that as well. We can then set you up to help our efforts when we're in that state. We're also not just resting with filing these bar complaints. I mentioned that part of our effort is forward-looking. One is that we're advertising the bar complaints to help create that deterrent effect, but the other is that we're on the cusp of launching another effort to have the bars consider rule changes that kind of focus on kind of the behaviors that we haven't found success in bringing complaints against. For example, public officials who are lawyers who participated as public officials in the effort to overturn the election aren't subject to bar complaints because they weren't representing clients in that moment. So we want to be able to maybe close some of those loopholes. We also, there are rules of professional conduct that restrict what you can say or do to judges or courts and how you speak about courts. And we think election administrators should have that same protection from lawyers. And so we're looking to kind of consider rules reform that restrict how lawyers treat election administrators and election officials.
So I see that Jazz has put a suggestion of perhaps the Global Black Caucus could co-sign. Are you reaching out to other organizations that can potentially co-sign on your complaints or somehow support you, work with you, collaborate with you?
There are a lot of organizations that have interest in this area. So we collaborate behind the scenes, then we decide how we're going to present it publicly. So we have done that. And Jazz, I'd be happy to talk with you about the opportunities going forward too.
Great. So let me just say, Emily's put in the chat box, please, if you have questions for Michael while he's here, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we will try and get to them. I don't see any there is one, hold on. Let me just check this. Actually, while I'm looking at this one, Jazz asks, can American lawyers living abroad support you?
Yes, we will take the support we can get from donations as well as from volunteer work. It doesn't matter where you are in this day and age. We can use your help.
If I may jump in there real quick, Elizabeth.
Yes, go ahead.
So the question I'm referring to is a little bit more, since you just mentioned lawyers that are registered under American bar. And what about the lawyers that might have their education done in Europe or in the AP region and are dual citizens, for example? Could they help? And I'm asking because the GBC has a legal counsel as well. And I might have some people that might be able to help, but I would need the...
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, we're not filing documents in court, so it doesn't require you to be licensed in that state. It might, you might limit your expertise or ability to have, some of the help that we're seeking are from people who are well known in the local community, former state bar presidents, former deans of law schools or current deans of law schools are assisting the efforts in that way. So it might limit the strength of the assistance, but there are many things that we can rely on people no matter what their background, education. Doesn't have to exclusively be lawyers either. And so we've had paralegals and others who are well known or well versed in the legal community to have their assistance as well. So there's no limit there, and we'll find the right place for people who want to volunteer.
Fantastic. Thanks for the question, Jazz. So Rick had a question, which I think he's withdrawn it, but I'm going to address it anyway as the chair's prerogative. And that is, why are we saying the rule of law came of age in Africa? All right, so we are the Democrats Abroad Africa Committee doing this particular webinar in conjunction with the Global Black Caucus. Thank you, Jazz. But we wanted to highlight the fact that Africa has played a key role in rule of law in history. It was not the birthplace, it was not the cradle of the rule of law. The rule of law came about really with the Hammurabi Code back in 1792 BC, as I said in my intro, but that's the Middle East. So Africa has a long history of where codes and particular structures of the law came about in the tribal systems here. And so it wasn't completely accurate to say the rule of law was born in Africa. Will it die in America? Although that was the really catchy title we started out with. So we said it came of age in Africa. And we sure hope it doesn't die in America. So I wanted to, we have a question also. Yes, Emily is asking, Michael, can you explain a little bit about what will happen to these lawyers if you are successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Emily. So it depends on the degree to which they were at fault, if you will. So we're not, in our complaints, we don't necessarily, in most of the instances, suggest an outcome for the lawyers, we think it's the responsibility of the disciplinary committee that's investigating to conduct an investigation, determine the facts, and determine what the best outcome is. Sometimes that will be by the committee, sometimes it will be by a judge. I will say that Rudy Giuliani, for example, has had his law license suspended immediately
in two jurisdictions, right?
In 2 jurisdictions, yeah.
Yeah.
He had New York suspended his law license, which is unusual because usually they suspended it pending the complete investigation, as opposed to just waiting until the investigation. And then DC followed suit and then suspended it in conjunction with the hearing that they're going to be holding soon. And so I think that for a lot of the attorneys, Sidney Powell is also is having her law license subjected to court hearing in the coming months. I think that, and John Eastman, I think the likely outcome is disbarment. I think there are other lawyers who participated in lawsuits, but were not maybe as, they weren't as egregious of lawsuits, or they were not leading the effort, or they were local counsel and they're largely doing what they were asked to do by the likes of Sidney Powell and the such, that a suspension or some form of other reprimand is going to be warranted. All of that matters because the moment the bar moves forward with the complaint, for example, in Georgia against the false electors, that becomes it becomes public. And that is monumental in terms of the degree of deterrence that we're trying to create. And second, it's expensive. They have to hire lawyers, they have to defend themselves, and the burden shifts to them in many respects in many of these states. And so even if we don't have an outcome in every case where the bar ultimately disciplines in the form that we want, just going through the process is a form of both discipline, accountability, and then we hope deterrent. Not just deterrent to the person who engaged in it, that specific deterrent, but also general deterrent to the legal community. And so we're amplifying the results as they come up, but also amplifying our efforts in local media where the lawyers are, so that they are aware of the legal community is aware of the complaint.
Well, speaking of local media, Michael, it strikes me that Trump's latest lawyers, the really good-looking women that he's hired in Florida, who don't seem to be quite competent legally in terms of what they've been filing, have sort of been shooting themselves and their client in the foot in these interviews that they are doing on the media. For example, the latest one I saw was I forget her first name, I think it's Alina Habba, was talking about how she'd been at Mar-a-Lago and been in his office. She was basically denigrating the photograph that was included as the last exhibit in the DOJ's filing on Tuesday night, which showed the cover pages only of the classified documents that they had seized from his Mar-a-Lago residence. And she said, "Oh, I've been in that office. Plenty of people are in that office, in and out all the time." And yet they found classified documents just in a drawer in his desk. And so what kinds of consequences do you think these lawyers who are doing things like that, potentially incriminating their clients by these kinds of statements, will they be facing?
I mean, oddly enough, Trump is his own worst enemy. Of course, that's not surprising, but his lawyers are next in line as who's his worst enemy. And their responsibility to the client it seems to be secondary to what they perceive as their responsibility to get media attention for themselves. And that I think ultimately is going to lead them to potential bar complaints and sanctions. But it also will lead to their client being more likely than not to be charged and convicted. They are quickly becoming witnesses, which any lawyer, I've been a lawyer for 20 years. No lawyer wants to become a witness in the case in which they are, but they are making themselves witnesses, which is it's a shame for the profession. That I think the real issue for me as a lawyer, and many lawyers out there, is that this is now becoming what is viewed as the normal world of lawyering. This is how the profession acts. And it is quite frankly, not what our expectations ought to be for the legal community. It's like watching LA Law and thinking that that's how lawyers always get to operate, which admittedly why I became a lawyer was watching LA Law, and it's nothing like that.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, we have a couple of questions. I'm not really sure which one to take first here. I'm going to ask for clarification of Brad's question here about what can we expect going forward from these legal fraudsters in the next election? Do you think they will regroup and find other ways to destabilize our democracy? And you're talking about the lawyers, I assume, Brad. If that's who you're talking about, what do you think about that? Do you think that they will be back in? Well, I mean, they are back in this election. I think they're already doing it myself.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that the best example of this, and by best, I mean also the saddest and worst, is somebody like Adam Laxalt, who's running for Senate in Nevada, who has already proclaimed that if he loses, it is based on fraud and that he will claim fraud. He's made that known. Other lawyers, or excuse me, other candidates have also made that known. So one of the things that is fortunate for us as well as unfortunate is that we came alive, the 65 Project, only this year. We didn't exist in 2020. We didn't exist in the early stages of 2021. So we have been backward looking, but we are making plans to be faster and swifter and reactive in a moment's notice after the 2022 midterm elections, because we think that the legal fraudsters, as you call them, will be there and will be back. And so we're ready to act quickly, and we're trying to coordinate as best we can with lawyers who will be defending the legitimate results on the ground, and so that we can provide information about the lawyers who are participating. We can provide the bar complaints. We can make sure that the judges and the courts are aware of this history and the claims that have already been lodged by these same kind of lawyers. And then I think that they are regrouping. I think the sad thing is that Cleta Mitchell, for example, said, well, we learned lessons from 2020 and we're going to do things differently, but they didn't learn the right lessons. They learned lessons of going after state judges and going after state secretaries of state. They're going to try to solve this through political means as much as they are going to try to solve them through legal means. And so we need to be nimble in that way as well.
So that's actually a good segue to the next question, which is a question about how we prevent this from happening again. Alpiocor says, if the lawyers are sanctioned, that would be great. But she asks also, are we looking at the proposed amending of statutes or modifying oaths for lawyers? Are we looking at different ways of regulating lawyers' ethical responsibilities?
Yeah, we are. And the other aspect of that, so we're focusing on rule changes. We found that the rules actually, in terms of fraudulent or frivolous claims, are pretty strong. The rules exist. The challenge in some respect has been in that they're not enforced. And what I feel like, I think a great example of this is that there were 42 lawyers who participated in Watergate in some form or another. And I believe the number is 24 of them, only 24 were disciplined by their state bars. So, I mean, if, how do 18 others get away with trying to, subvert the rule of law through Watergate? And so we have, I'd like to imagine it as, we have an apparata that is not in each of these states that is not accustomed to moving or moving particularly quickly. And we are trying to get those wheels turning, the crank shifting, and we're trying to get the state bar organizations to be able to take on these complaints and then move with them quickly. It's hard. They don't have the funding. They don't have the staffing that would be necessary to do it. To have 15 bar complaints filed at one time is a lot of investigatory work, but we need to have some system in place to deal with this. And we've had some criticisms that we're weaponizing the state bar system. And I think it's the opposite. We have the system. This is what's been given to us to discipline lawyers. It exists.
But it needs ammunition.
Yeah, and we need to use it. Because if we don't use it, the risk associated with not doing something is far greater than the risk associated with doing something.
I totally agree. And I would note, in my opinion, the same risk exists if we don't indict Donald Trump for the crimes that are now so brazenly out in the open. So we do have time for a couple more questions for Michael, if anybody has one. I don't see any here. Michael, can you stay around to the end, or do you have to leave us right away?
I have to leave in a few minutes, but I have a little bit more time.
Okay. Well, I have one more question for you, and it goes to deterrence, really. I think what we're finding is Donald Trump himself is sort of digging around the bottom of the barrel in terms of lawyers right now, big law lawyers. I was in big law for some 25 years. I would never, well, I mean, I never would have taken a case for him. Yeah. But they won't, the reputable lawyers with the good reputations will not take his cases anymore. And so he's ending up with these people like Ms. Bob and Ms. Haba, who look really great, but they don't really seem to be coming through in terms of the actual competence in legal work. So do you think that your work is already having a deterrent effect on the law firms, or are there other factors going on as well?
I think our work is having a deterrent effect. We've had, I was in big law for a while. I have lots of friends, and I've also, since I taught in academia for 10 years, I have a lot of friends who are in, and former students who are in academia, or excuse me, are in big law. And I know that our complaints and the news stories around them circulate among the firms. And so that they're very well aware of what we're doing and the potential consequences of it. There are other factors as well. I mean, there's pressures from their clients, there's pressures from other partners. But one of the aspects that we're doing that's not, that we discuss, but is not seen, is that we're doing geopolitical targeting, so that when somebody Googles a lawyer who has been had a bar complaint against them, this is one of the first things that comes up. We're making sure that law firms are aware within the proximity of the bar complaints that we're filing of the filings against other lawyers. And we've seen a lot of law firms, prestigious ones, but also even smaller ones that are just reputable in the States, shy away from wanting to involve themselves in this kind of stuff. And then when we launched, we actually had a number of lawyers reach out to us. I received emails from lawyers in Arizona, in Wisconsin, and across the country who said, look, I was involved in this lawsuit. It was legitimate until this time. And then once I realized that the results wouldn't be affected by this, then I withdrew and we voluntarily dismissed it. Please don't file a bar complaint against us. And so even the initial launch demonstrated that we're having an effect. And one of my favorite stories is that very recently, when we filed the Pennsylvania lawsuits, or not lawsuits, bar complaints, one of the lawyers, Linda Kearns, then told the newspaper, it was in the Philadelphia Inquirer, so it was front page, told the Philadelphia Inquirer, well, they're successful because I feel shamed, I feel embarrassed, which is part of our effort to make them bring attention to their efforts and let them feel that shame for a moment within the legal community.
Wow. Well, I feel proud, and I'm really glad to hear of your efforts and learn more about it. We have one more question here. Could you, speaking of Arizona, we do have some Arizona voters on the call. Can you speak maybe to some of the, are you filing suits in Arizona? If I missed you saying that, sorry. Who are the Arizonas involved? And what about the use of the Secretary of State seal by false electors?
So we are looking at Arizona. In fact, we are drafting bar complaints right now. There have been bar complaints filed against some of the lawyers in Arizona. And because of that, and the court has not moved on them. So we're waiting to see what happens with a few of them. But because so many of the lawyers were intersected, many of the lawyers that we just filed against were also involved in Arizona litigation. So we filed just bar complaints right now against all of the Kraken lawyers, the ones Sidney Powell's team. And of those lawyers, Brandon Johnson, Emily Newman, and others who are across the country, they were involved in Arizona as well. So we have started filing bar complaints against Arizona based lawsuits, and we have more to come. The false electors in Arizona, fortunately, but unfortunately, none of them were lawyers. And so because what we're looking at is really focused on the rules of professional conduct, the people who are false electors aren't subject to bar complaints, but the people who are advising them, who are lawyers, were, and we have filed bar complaints against them.
Great. All right. Well, I don't see any more questions for you, Michael. So let's put the 65 Project website in the chat for the folks so that they can know where to go to donate, or if you're a lawyer and you want to volunteer, go there. You can sign up. This has been just really, really phenomenal to have you, Michael. And as I said, I'm really proud as a lawyer to see this effort going on, because seeing the kind of corruption of the lawyers who tried to undermine our democracy and overthrow a government, providing the supposed legal justification to do so, just appalled me. And I haven't been in a courtroom in a long time, but I was just ready to get up there and
Thank you for your
argue
support.
against this.
And thank you for hosting me today. And thank you, Jazz, for hosting as well. And Emily, for your help in making this run. I appreciate it.
All right. And I'll put you in touch with Jazz as well, so you can talk about potential collaboration.
Great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Michael. All right, so go back to here, and our next segment, I'm just so chuffed about that. Really, really, really. But the next segment is really, really important. It gets to the question about what are we going to do about this? And what we're going to do about this, those of us who live abroad, we're going to vote. And so we have somebody with us now. I'm very pleased to have Katie Solon, who is a member of the DNC, that is the Democratic National Committee, which is the party, and our global Get Out the Vote coordinator for Democrats abroad. So Katie, if you would take it over, what can we do? How do we do it?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for this really, really interesting and intriguing session, some of which my Northern German human rights lawyer husband was listening in on. I wanted more about Arizona, but I realized we didn't send the lawyers in our false electors. We sent the cowboys and the guy with the big horn helmet who was in the insurrection, and Fox News anchors, other colorful characters coming out of Arizona. But what can we do? We can do two things. I mean, it comes down to really two things. Make sure that we're voting and make sure that everybody else that we know is voting, whether they're abroad or at home. So we have just a couple of slides where it's all packed in there. And I know that this is preaching to the choir for some of the people who are on the call, but maybe somebody on the call has not gotten their own ballot yet or hasn't been to vote from abroad. Please go. There are 3 simple steps to voting from abroad: requesting your ballot, receiving your ballot, and sending it back. The law varies and the deadlines vary from state to state. So the best place to go is votefromabroad.org to find out the rules for your state. Please always ask to receive your ballot by email. Every state is required to send the overseas voter the ballot by email if they request it. It doesn't matter if you live in a country where the mail is good. Don't rely on the US mail. Get your ballot by email and send it back electronically if you can. About 30 states allow you to either email it, upload it, or fax it. Please send it that way. And now we get into the place where there are states that require postal mail return. And if you live in a country, and I think there's a lot of them in this region of the world, where the mail system is not reliable, but you need to return it by mail, you're in a pickle. So you need to act fast. You need to get your ballot as early as you can, which is September 24th, and then find out what the rules are for the diplomatic pouch in your country or courier services. And most of our countries that have a country committee are putting information on their web pages now about the diplomatic pouch deadlines and rules in the country and about courier services. So you can go looking at democratsabroad.org and click on the country and get some information there. Otherwise, you can simply Google the US Embassy in your country and find out how can ballots be dropped into the pouch and what the deadlines are. Safe to say, 5 weeks before the election should be your deadline to use the pouch. It can definitely take that long for pouch letters to get delivered in the US. And then another tip is to vote down ballot. If you get a full ballot, make sure you vote the whole thing. And if your state sends only full ballots to people who mark intend to return, which about 20 states do, then think about your intentions and think about the consequences of all these state and local races. And then finally, track your form when you send it in and when you send your ballot in. This is easy to do, and votefromabroad.org gives you the instructions where you need to go to verify both your form and your ballot. If you have any questions, you can go back to votefromabroad.org and go to the red chat bubble, which will take you to our help desk, or write us at information@democratsabroad.org. So that's really voting from abroad in a nutshell. But Emily, if you can show the next slide, it's going to explain why it's important to use this request form. that you get at votefromabroad.org. Some people, especially now with more and more states doing no excuse mail balloting and getting much better on the domestic level, some people will get an absentee ballot that's a domestic ballot and have it forwarded to them. Well, you really run the risk of not getting it or not getting it on time. If you use this form to request your ballot, send it by email, receive your ballot by email, you're also going to get some critical federal protections. Overseas voters get the ballot sent out 45 days before the election. All states must send you the ballot by email if you request it. Most states allow for electronic transmission. Some states give extended deadlines so that your ballot might need to be postmarked by election day, but arrive after. And if you use this FPCA form to request your ballot, then you can use the backup ballot, which is a write-in ballot if you feel like your state ballot isn't going to get to you on time. And the next slide, Emily, talks about why I use Vote from Abroad instead of the other websites that are available. And here are the reasons. The rules for your state automatically come up when you're filling out the form. It's legible when you finish it. The instructions for how to send it in and how to verify that it got there are included. And most people can submit directly from the website. And then finally, that nice little red bubble on every screen where voters can ask questions. And the next slide shows the map, I think. It's the green map. Every state that's in green on this map does not require you to print your FPCA request form. You can send it in directly from Vote from Abroad by taking a picture of your signature. And that is mega cool. So the vast majority of states allow that. The red states on here, everybody must print their form, their request form. The yellow, if you can read it clearly, is if you're requesting the ballot, you don't need to print it. But if you're registering to vote in the yellow states, you do need to print it. And then that little stripey thing, is that Alabama? I don't know what it is. Some are, if you're registering to vote, you have to print it. And some counties tell everybody to print. So that's Arkansas. The best place to figure out really what your state requires, votefromabroad.org/states. And then you can really figure out what your deadlines are and how you can send things. So I think that's all that we have on. No, we don't. There is the backup ballot. And I put this slide in especially for voters who are living in Africa. If you feel like you need to get your ballot earlier than September 24th, which is 45 days out, you want to send it back so that you know it will get there. If you send in this FPCA, you can fill out a write-in ballot, also called a backup ballot, federal write-in absentee ballot, a FWAB. You can vote, download, vote, send it in as early as you want. You can send it in right now. You can send it today. So we're going to share these slides with you later. And if you click on that PowerPoint at the bottom, you will get very detailed instructions about how to use a backup ballot. So I think that's all that we have on to talk about on voting. I'm happy to not show the slides yet, but to take any questions, maybe to stop sharing. Are we going to be able to see people who are on the call at this point, Elizabeth, or no? We see their names and the participants. And I can look in the chat box. If anyone has any questions or comments about voting, would be happy to take them.
We had a hand up from Corey, but I believe he put it down. So,
okay.
but feel free to put your questions in the Q&A.
All right. So my fellow Arizona voter, hi Corey, you're up late.
Well, that we are open for Q&A right now.
All right. Well, I'm looking at a lot of I'm looking at the participant list now. So I know there's a whole bunch of people on that list that know a lot about voting and have been helping voters for years. If this is new information to you, please use it. And for the others, we can look at the next slide, because the next slide talks about things that all of us can do. It's only 67 days. We need to really be focusing on increasing the overseas vote, because we know many of these important races are going to be close at the federal level, at the state level, at the local level. And when they're close, then it's our votes that can really win it. So please look at this
That's
list
right.
and see what you can do. We kind of did it from what you can do most quickly or maybe most urgently. The first thing we've been over. The second thing is, please add vote from abroad to your email signature so that every time you send an email, people see it. If you're communicating with a lot of people in the US, there's a number of websites you could use that they can click on to register to vote where they're living in the US. The third thing would be to get this out on social media. Every channel that you're on, every group that you're in, do it nonpartisan if you feel like you have to. We know the overseas vote is overwhelmingly Democrat, so we're happy to help everybody, but get the word out. There are far more Americans abroad who are not voting than are voting. So you all know
Right.
somebody who's not been voting. Get them to vote this year. This election is as critical as 2020 and any other election that we can remember. Number 4 is the alma mater letter, which many of you, I hope, have heard about. It's one of our academic outreach efforts. We're asking every member of Democrats Abroad to write to their own university, their alma mater, and make sure that they're including overseas voting information in the packets that their study abroad students are getting. 300,000 students going abroad this fall. They will arrive in time to get overseas ballots and vote them. They don't know about it. If we can help get to them, that's a lot of votes. Number 5 is phone banking. I can't believe it's number 5. For me, it's number 1 almost all the time. I'm a phone banking fanatic because I know that it works. I've been working with lots of callers and coordinators over the years. We've tracked our calls. It is, if not the best, one of the best ways to reach our members. In the spring, our rough statistics were 40% of the people we talked to used vote from abroad. And at the same time, only 15% of all of our members used vote from abroad. So it's incredible what these calls do. We're only calling DA members. It's warm calling, not cold calling. Somebody said the other day, it's free, it's easy to do. Click on this link when we share the slides, or just go to democratsabroad.org/phone banking, and you can get going with calling. Keeping going on this list, get trained to help other voters learn everything that was on that first slide, and you can get on to Intercom and start taking voter questions, because 90% of them are really easy questions. But if we
Hey,
don't
Katie.
ask them, they won't be voting. Yes, Elizabeth. Go
Can
ahead.
you explain what Intercom is? Probably most people know, but
Yeah,
I only found
sure.
out fairly recently, the last couple of months.
Okay, it's a platform that we've been using that kind of funnels all the voter queries that come into Democrats Abroad. So we get plenty of questions. We get them by email, maybe even by Facebook and Twitter. A lot of them come in when we're phone banking, and the person on the phone asks a question that the caller can't answer. They write it into a notes box and it comes into Intercom. And then emails from various sources come into Intercom if you write to Vote from Abroad or Democrats Abroad. And then finally, I pointed out that little red chat bubble at Vote from Abroad where people ask questions. Those questions come into Intercom. So they all get gathered in one place. It's like a giant inbox, and we have round the clock by now, but we have dozens of Democrats Abroad volunteers that go into Intercom and grab a question and answer it. Some of them are assigned to a question. You have your own inbox. Some of the questions are sorted into question about this country or question about this voting state. You need a little bit of training to be helpful on Intercom. We have a great short, easy to understand training. We have a wonderful team that's running Intercom. It's not rocket science what we're doing. You do have to understand something about voting, and you do have to learn the platform. but then it's as easy as answering an email. Not for me, I'll tell you, the first time I went on a few months ago, I thought, this isn't so bad. I answered a question about Arizona, and then I went ahead and I took 7 more. And I felt very good about the short, sweet little answers I gave. And I walked away from my computer and I came back an hour later and I had 7 emails from Intercom telling me, one of our managers, that I needed to send it to the voter instead of sending it back to the help desk, which I had done. I had 7 great answers, but they never got to the voters. Great thing it was on Intercom and not my private email account, because someone else could catch it. And then I could learn how you need to copy and paste the voter's email into the right spot so that the email actually goes to them. But Intercom is a great thing. The first year we used it in 2016, we helped about 30,000 voters. And I think in 2020, probably around 100,000. These queries will pick up as we get closer to the election and deadlines are falling. And as we make more calls, we're going to make 150,000 calls in the next couple of weeks. That means more questions and we need more help on Intercom. Couple other things, and I'll go through them quickly. I can't see the chat, but join a state team. Democrats Abroad has state teams for each of the battleground states that we're focused on. And you can, as a voter or an ally, really help to try to get out the vote in that state where we know rests, the decisions that are going to mean control of the Senate and control of the House, without which we will do nothing in the next couple of years. Number 8 is to adopt a campaign. One of these very critical races, we have a list of campaign websites, and you can really, get involved with one of them. Number 9 is really 9 people. Find 3 people that you know or don't know abroad or at home, but abroad is easy because you find Americans and they haven't been voting. Help them to get their ballots. It takes 5 minutes, that vote from abroad, and get them to commit to helping 3 more. And right there, you've just added 9 votes to whatever's happening on November 8th. And the last thing is donations to Democrats Abroad. Lots of other people want our money in an election year, and there are lots of good places to give it, but there's no place better to get the biggest bang for your buck than Democrats Abroad. We have no office, no overhead, no electric bills, no consultants. Oh, not really. Let's see where we're going with that. Anyway, it costs us about 33 cents to contact a voter. Nobody in the US is contacting voters for 33 cents. We're terribly effective with our money. We're terribly frugal and careful. So if you know somebody who's got some to give, doesn't have to be you, but again, you might know somebody who doesn't have time to do numbers 1 through 9, so they'd rather do 10 so that we can do the rest of the work. So yeah, thank you very much. And we can share this because each one of these links is live and it will take you to where you need to go. Please do 1 of them, do 10 of them. Help us win in November. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much, Katie. Very, very great ideas. Wes Edwards suggests that because many students are not aware that they can register and vote from abroad, I'm sure that's true. We have a lot of people in Morocco who've lived in the States for 20, 30, 40 years. They come back to Morocco as US citizens, they have no idea. I'm sure students are a pretty similar situation. So copy your alma mater letter to the College Democrats organization at your university is his suggestion. So thank you for that, Wes.
Yeah, Wes, that's a great idea. And the alma mater letter is just one aspect of our student outreach. We are trying to hit them from a number of times from a number of different places. On the US side, the state teams are also contacting the major universities in the battleground states, and they are trying to get to the study abroad offices to put the info in the packets. They're also trying to get to student newspapers, print or digital, to put in some public service announcements about voting. And they're also trying to get to the college Dems and offer them events with us or speakers at some of their events. So on the US side, we're trying in a number of ways. We're also getting in touch with some of these study abroad umbrella organizations. And we're giving nonpartisan voting information. And then on the countryside, all of you who are working in country committees or in countries where there isn't a committee, you can get in touch with study abroad offices. They are everywhere, or international student offices at local universities, and ask them, give them just a short blurb. We have many examples we can give you to give them of nonpartisan voting information. So the students might hear about voting from a number of sources. And of course, every nudge might be the one that actually makes them do it and get their ballot.
Great, thank you, Katie. Well, I have a few wrap-up comments, but before that, Jazz has put something extremely provocative in the chat, and I'm going to ask him what he's talking about, that there's been a great hot off the press development regarding today's event. So Jazz, would you like to come back on screen and tell us what the heck is going on?
Yes, I just had word from one of our great volunteers and super supporters, Adrienne Johnson, that breaking news, top lawyer for Oath Keepers has been arrested in connection with the January 6th attack.
My goodness, wow. Justice is coming. I keep saying that on my Tilila report. I give this little podcast. It's the Freedom Report in the Berber language. Okay, thank you for that update, Jazz. Good news, good news. Well, I think we're sort of speaking to the choir, preaching to the choir right now. We've got a few people left here, and I'm going to skip over probably most of my closing remarks, but I do want to talk a little bit just about Democrats Abroad Africa Committee, since we are also new this year. We were born on January 22nd of this year, my mother's birthday, and we, I think, are a recognition of the growing strategic, political, economic, and social significance of Africa to the US. There's deep historical ties between Africa and people of African descent, and thousands of American citizens living on the continent, many of whom, like the folks I was just talking about in Morocco, have come back to their roots. And as we know, the overseas vote helped President Biden in several key battleground states win in 2020. And so there is so much at stake this year. 34 US Senate seats, all 435 US representative seats, 46 state legislatures, and 36 state governorships are up for grabs. And so please go to votefromabroad.org and request your ballot, as Katie showed how. It's very easy. It's a great website. It's very user-friendly. And if you have difficulties at all, you can contact us, the help desk, or contact info@democratsabroad.org. It is your federally guaranteed right under the US Constitution to vote as a US citizen abroad, including dual citizens. And so let's do it. What we try and do here at Democrats Abroad is to make sure your vote gets home. So I'd like to give a big shout out and thank you to Michael Teter, who was with us, for his important work on maintaining the rule of law, ensuring accountability amongst our brothers and sisters at the bar. And I hope you will support the 65 project, because I really feel it is making a deterrence effect already, as new as it is. I want to thank you, Jazz, for being our co-sponsor and co-host for this event. I loved what you said at the beginning, and I think it dovetailed very nicely with the remarks that I had about the rule of law. And thanks to our executive council members who are here, and to all our great volunteers, both on camera and off behind the scenes, who help make things go smoothly and who really drive the mission of Democrats Abroad worldwide. And please consider joining Democrats Abroad Africa Committee. We have critical work ahead of us that we absolutely must win. I'll reiterate, Katie, your 10 things we can all do in these last critical 67 days. Once again, I'll ask Emily to put our volunteer link in the chat box. And finally, please remember that as an all-volunteer organization, your donation goes a long, long way. So let's get inspired. Let's be the change we want to see by exercising our fundamental right to vote. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.